What is going on, garden fans? Welcome back to the Permaculture Homestead. In tonight's live stream, we are continuing our live stream reading through the Permaculture Design Manual. As before, a little housekeeping stuff to start with. Uh, be, because of the nature of live stream, my audio and your video might not be syncing up. Doesn't matter, just keep watching. It should catch up, or you're here to listen to me anyway. This is a live reading. So it doesn't matter what I look like. The time and day that I'm doing this today, Friday at 8:30, is going to be the time going forward. So next Friday at 8:30 Eastern time, we're going to be starting through chapter 2. And because chapter 2 is so big, we're probably going to read through a couple sections, probably through 2.1 through 2.4. I'm going to try to keep all of these live stream videos to about 30 minutes. I don't want to overdo it with this, but I do want to get the content out there in a timely fashion for y'all this spring and this summer. For those that are here right now, let's give a big thanks to our moderator, my wife. She's going to be eyeballing the chat. So as always, keep your conversation civil. If you have any questions, go ahead, ask them. We'll get to them at some points throughout the reading today. General other housekeeping, I got some videos coming out this weekend of my front yard edible landscape and my backyard food forest. And also for next week, last bit of housekeeping, my best to get a better live stream interface for y'all. I want to be able to share my screen with you and show you some of the pictures in the design manual moving forward. For the prep for chapter 1 doesn't really matter, but as we get into chapter 2, 3, and 4, it's going to be nice for you to see some of the pictures that are in the manual. So if anybody's got any suggestions, go ahead and throw them out there. I'm going to be looking for some in the next week. With that being said, let me get set up here to start reading through. And like I said before, we are in chapter 1, Permaculture Design Manual, reading chapter 1.1, .2, and .3. And I'm just going to get through this the best I can for y'all. Picking up where we left off, if you're reading this along with me in the manual, we are on page 1. This is Introduction, Permaculture Design Philosophy 1.1. Although this book is about design, it is also about values and ethics, and about a sense of personal responsibility for earth care. I have written at times in the first person to indicate that this is not a detached, impersonal, or even unbiased document. Every book or publication has an author. What that author chooses to write about is subjective. That person alone determines the subject, content, and the values expressed or omitted. Not detached, but have been passionately involved with this earth. And so herein give a brief vision of what I think can be achieved by anyone. So Bill's just basically saying most of this book is in the first person view. He's got a very strong attachment to this content, and he's going to give it to you in the first person. And he gives it to us here in paragraph 2, right out the back. The sad reality is that we are in danger of perishing from our own stupidity and lack of personal responsibility to life. If we become extinct because of factors beyond our control, then we can at least die with pride in ourselves. But to create a mess in which we perish by our own inaction makes nonsense of our claims to consciousness and morality. So if we die by a meteor, that's okay. Nothing we could do. We did our best. But if we die because of our farming practices or the way we're living or the way we govern ourselves, that's just a mess. That's just ridiculous. And that hits at the core of what it means to be a conscious human being. There is too much contemporary evidence of ecological disaster, which appalls me, and it should frighten you too. Our consumptive lifestyle has led us to the very brink of annihilation. We have expanded our right to live on this earth to an entitlement to conquer the earth, yet conquerors of nature always lose. To accumulate wealth, power, or land beyond one's needs in a limited world is to be truly immoral, be it as an individual, an institution, or a nation state. What we have done, we can undo. There is no longer time to waste, nor any need to accumulate more evidence of disasters. The time for action is here. I deeply believe that people are the only critical resource needed by people. Ourselves, if we organize our talents, are sufficient to each other. What is more, we will either survive together or none of us will survive. To fight between ourselves is as stupid and wasteful as it is to fight during times of natural disasters when everyone's cooperation is vital. Now, he wrote this back in the 80s. And does this, kind of ring a bell for anybody here? Maybe the pandemic comes to mind a little bit, fighting during times of natural disaster when our cooperation is vital. And here again, this was written back in the 70s, early 80s. So he was hitting at the core of American greed that prevails in Western society ultimately. A person of courage today is a person of peace. The courage we need is to refuse authority and to accept only personally responsible decisions. Like war, growth at any cost is an outmoded and discredited concept. It is our lives which are being laid to waste. What is worse, it is our children's world which is being destroyed. It is therefore our only possible decision to withhold all support for destructive systems and to invest our lives in our own annihilation. I hope all of this rings home to everybody here. He's just basically talking about the war cycle that has been pervading across humanity for so long. World War I, World War II, we can even go back further, and we can even look forward to the wars that we have coming. What we're doing is not sustainable. We need a change. And Bill's here to tell us how to do that. The prime directive of permaculture. The only ethical decision is to take responsibility for our own existence and that of our children. Make it now. Most thinking people would agree that we have arrived at final and irrevocable decisions that will abolish or sustain life on this earth. We can either ignore the madness of uncontrolled industrial growth and defense spending that is in small bites, or large catastrophes, eroding life forms every day, or take the path to life and survival. Here again, he's just hitting at the military industrial complex here. Information and humanity, science and understanding are in transition. Long ago, we began by wondering mainly about what is most distant. Astronomy and astrology were our ancient preoccupations. We progressed, millennia by millennia, to enumerating the wonders of the earth, first by naming things, then by categorizing them, and more recently by deciding how they function and what work they do within and without themselves. This analysis has resulted in the development of different sciences, disciplines, and technologies. A welter of names and the saundering of parts, a proliferation of and a consequent inability to foresee results or to design integrated systems. The present great shift in emphasis is on how parts interact, how they work together with each other, how dissonance or harmony in life systems or society is achieved. Life is cooperative rather than competitive, and life forms are very different, and life forms of very different qualities may interact beneficially with one another and with their physical environment. Even the bacteria live by collaboration, accommodation, exchange, and barter. That's from Lewis Thomas, 1974. Principle of cooperation. This is a big one for permaculture, and I preach it at every tour that I do. Cooperation, not competition, is the very basis of existing life systems and of future survival. I talk about this all the time. When I do a tour, I tell everybody that plants work with each other. They have a natural symbiosis. There is a cooperation in the designs that we do. There's not a competition. Current monocultural practices, the biggest thing they talk about is competition in nature. And this is why we have monoculture. We have peach orchards, corn plots, soy farms, apple orchards, and they're all spaced 20 feet apart in a sterile environment, sprayed pesticides, herbicides, fungicide, and then we kill the soil, we kill the organic material in there, and now we have to fertilize it, and we're killing the soil even more. So because of this idea that plants compete, we've created this system that is destroying the earth and not regenerating the earth. Getting back to Bill words. There are many opportunities to create systems that work from the elements and technologies that exist. Perhaps we should do nothing else for the next century but apply our knowledge. Basically, we've got all the information in the world, but not a lick of wisdom. We already know how to build, maintain, and inhabit sustainable systems. Every problem is, but in the everyday life of people, this is hardly apparent. The wage slave, peasant, landlord, and industrialist alike are deprived of the leisure and the life spirit that is possible in a cooperative society, which applies its knowledge. Both warders and prisoners are equally captive in the society in which we live. If we question why we are here and what life is, then we lead ourselves into both science and mysticism, which are coming closer together as science itself approaches its conceptual limits. As for life, it is the most open of open systems, able to take the energy resources in time and to re-express itself, not only as a lifetime, but as a descent and an evolution by going down and up at the same time. Lovelock, 1979, has perhaps best expressed a philosophy or insight which links science and tribal beliefs. He sees the earth and the universe as a thought process, or as a self-regulating, self-constructed, and reactive system, creating and preserving the conditions that make life possible, and actively adjusting to regulate disturbances. Humanity, however, in its present mindlessness, may be the one disturbance that the earth cannot tolerate. This is a quote out of Lovelock's book from 1979 that Bill includes here. The Gaia hypothesis is for those who like to walk or simply stand and stare, wonder about the earth it bears, and to speculate about the consequences of our own presence here. It is an alternative to that pessimistic view which sees nature as a primitive force to be subdued and conquered. It is also an alternative to that equally depressing picture of our planet as a demented, forever traveling, driverless, and purposeless around an inner circle of the sun. Once again, that's from J.E. Lovelock, 1979. For every scientific statement articulated on energy, the Aboriginal tribespeople of Australia have an equivalent statement on life. Life, they say, is a totality, neither created nor destroyed. It can be imagined as an egg from which all tribes, life forms, issue, and to which all return. The ideal way in which to spend one's time is in the of the expression of life, to lead the most evolved life possible, and to assist in and celebrate the existence of life forms other than humans, for all come from the same egg. The totality of this outlook leads to a meaningful daily existence in which one seeks each quantum of life eternally, trying to perfect an expression towards the future and possibly transcendental perfection. It is all the more horrific, therefore, that tribal peoples, whose aim was to develop a conceptual and spiritual existence, have encountered a crude scientific and material culture, whose life aim is not only unstated, but which relies on pseudo-economic and technological systems for its existence. Bill's putting together the Aboriginal people and technological systems for its existence. Bill's putting together the Aboriginal people and current existence clashing with each other. It doesn't work out. These people were living in peace for relative generation, and here came science and pseudo-economic and government to just trample on them. Let's keep going here. The experience of the natural world and its laws have almost been abandoned for closed, artificial, and meaningless lives, perhaps best typified by the dreams of those who would live in space satellites and abandon a dying Earth. Mind you, this was all written back in the 80s. It rings very true to what's going on today in our world. I believe that unless we adopt sophisticated Aboriginal belief systems and learn respect for all life, then we lose our own, not only as lifetime, but also as any future opportunity to evolve our potential. Yeah, basically here again, he's saying we need to get on track or we're going to lose it forever. Whether we continue without an ethic or a philosophy, like abandoned and orphaned children, or whether we create opportunities, whether we continue without an ethic or a philosophy, like abandoned and orphaned children, or whether we create opportunities to achieve maturity, balance, and harmony is the only real question that faces this present generation. This is the debate that must never stop. A young woman once came to me after a lecture in which I wondered at the various concepts of afterlife, the plethora of heavens offered by various groups. Her view was, this is heaven, right here. This is it. Give it all you got. I couldn't better that advice. The heaven or hell we live in is of our own making. An afterlife, if such exists, can be no different for each of us. Moving on, we're going to get into 1.2. Obviously, Bill's pontificating a little bit on the problems of society and what's going on in the world then, and obviously what's happening to the world now. It's all very valid and relevant. In 1.2, he's going to get into the ethics of permaculture. Here again, more of the philosophy of permaculture and why we do what we do. In earlier days, several of us researched community ethics as adopted by older religious and cooperative groups, seeking for universal principles to guide our own actions. Although many of these guidelines contained as many as 18 principles, most of these can be included in the 3 below, and even the second and third arise from the first. The ethical basis of permaculture. Here we go. Number 1, care of the earth care. Provision for all life systems to continue and multiply. Number 2, ethical basis of permaculture. Care of people care. Provision for people to access those resources necessary to their existence. Get what you need. Stay alive. Number 3, setting limits to population and consumption. By governing our own needs, we can set resources aside to further the above principles, which are care of the earth and care of people. This is basically the 3 main ethical principles of permaculture that are preached at just about every permaculture design course you'll ever go to. Earth care and people care, and then by an extension, limiting our consumption and making sure we get what we need. This ethic is a very simple statement of guidance and serves well to illuminate everyday endeavors. It can be coupled to a determination to make our own way, to be neither employers nor employees, landlords nor tenants, but to be self-reliant as individuals and to cooperate as groups. This is very similar to the introduction and preface that we read last week. This kind of talks about the decentralized nature of permaculture. Ultimately, take care of yourself first, then it's going to be easier to take care of others. For the sake of the earth itself, I evolved the philosophy, close to Taoism, from my experiences with natural systems. As it was stated in Permaculture 2, it is a philosophy of working with rather than against nature, of protracted and thoughtful observation rather than protracted and thoughtless action, of looking at systems and people in all their functions, rather than asking only one yield of them, and of allowing systems to demonstrate their own evolutions. A basic question that can be asked in 2 ways is, what can I get from this land or person, quote unquote, or, quote unquote, what does this person or land have to give if I cooperate with them? 2 totally different questions there. One more time. What can I get from this land or person? Or what does this person or land have to give if I cooperate with them? Of these 2 approaches, the former leads to war and waste, what we're living right now. The latter to peace and plenty, not how we are living right now. Most conflicts, I find, lay in how such questions are asked, and not in the answers to any question. Or, to put it another way, we are clearly looking for the right questions rather than for answers. We should be alert to rephrase or refuse the wrong question. It has become evident that unity in people comes from a common adherence to a set of ethical principles. each of us perhaps going our own way at our own pace and within the limits of our resources, yet all leading to the same goals, which in our own case is that of living complex and sustainable Earth. Those who agree on such ethics, philosophies, and goals form a global nation. How do how do a people evolve an ethic, and why should we bother to do so? He asks. Humans are thinking beings with long memories, oral and written records, and the ability to investigate the distant past by applying a variety of techniques from dendrochronology to archaeology, pollen analysis to the geological sciences. It is therefore evident that behaviors in the natural world, which we thought appropriate at one time, later proved to be damaging to our own society in the long term. Example, the effects of biocidal pest controls on soil and water. Thus, we are led by information, reflection, and careful investigation to moderate, abandon, or forbid certain behaviors and substances that in the long term threaten our own survival. We act to survive. Conservative and cautious rules of behavior are evolved. This is a rational and sensible process, responsible for many taboos in tribal societies. From a great many case histories, we can list some rules of use. For example, the rules of necessitous use, that we leave any natural system alone until we are, of strict necessity, forced to use it. We may then follow up with the rules of conservative use. Having found it necessary to source, we may insist on every attempt to reduce waste, hence pollution, thoroughly replace lost minerals, do a careful energy accounting, and make an assessment of the long-term negative biosocial effects on society and act to buffer or eliminate these. I get the feeling that he's really hitting on the oil industry here. You know, we're going to take, but we're not going to account for what we're taking. We're not going to replace anything that we've taken, and we're not going to assess the long-term negative benefit, good or bad things that can happen because of us doing this. It's just, I get the feeling that he's really kind of jabbing at the oil in here with this one. Moving on. In practice, we evolve time to various forms of accounting for our actions. Such accounts are fiscal, social, environmental, aesthetic, or energetic in nature, and all are appropriate to our own survival. Consideration of these rules of necessitous and conservative use may lead us, step by step, to the basic realization of our interconnectedness with nature, that we depend on good health in all systems for our survival. Thus, we widen the self-interested idea of human survival on the basis of past famine and environmental disaster, to include the idea of the survival of natural systems, and can see, for example, that when we lose plant and animal species due to our actions, we lose many survival opportunities. Our fates are intertwined. This process, or something like it, is common to every group of people who evolve a general earth care ethic. Here is that interconnected nature that we have with all of society and all of Earth that he's talking about. If we lose plants, if we lose animals, we're all going to be affected. Having developed an earth care ethic by assessing our best course for survival, we then turn to our relationships with others. Here, we observe a general rule of nature that cooperative species and associations of self-supporting species, like mycorrhiza on tree roots, make healthy communities. Such lessons lead us to a sensible resolve to cooperate and take support roles in society, to foster an interdependence which values the individual's contributions rather than forms of opposition or competition. He's not quite talking about communism here, although it may sound like that. Although initially we can see how helping our family and friends assists us in our own survival, we may evolve the mature ethic that sees all humankind as family and all life as allied associations. Thus, we expand people care to species care, for all life has common origins. All are our family. We see how enlightened self-interest leads us to evolve ethics of sustainable and sensible behavior. These then are the ethics expressed in permaculture. Having evolved ethics, we can then devise ways to apply them to our lives, economies, gardens, land, and nature. This is what this book is about: the mechanisms of nature, mature ethical behavior, or how to act to sustain the earth. There is more than one way to achieve permanence and stability in land or society. The peasant approach is well described by King for Old China. That's what it says. The peasant approach is well described by King for Old China. Here, people hauled nutrients from canals, cesspits, pathways, and forests to an annual grain culture. We could describe this as feudal permanence for its methods, period, and politics. People were bound to the landscape by unremitting toil and in service to a state or landlord. This eventually leads to famine and revolution. A second approach is on permanent pasture of prairies, pampas, and modern Western farms, where large holdings and few people create vast grazing leases, usually for a single species or animal. This is best described as baronial permanence, with near regal properties of immense extent, working at the lowest possible level of land use. Pasture or cropland is the least productive use of land we can devise. Such systems, once mechanized, destroy whole landscapes and soil complexes. They can then best be typified as agricultural deserts. Forests, not seen by industrial man as anything but wood, are another permanent agriculture, but they need generations of care and knowledge, and hence a tribal or communal reverence only found in the stable communities. This then is the communal permanence many of us seek: to live wild in the jungle, to be able to plant a pecan or citrus when we are old, and to know it will not be cut down by our children's children. The further we depart from communal permanence, the greater the risk of tyranny, feudalism, and revolution, and the more work for less yield. That really should be hitting home to everybody listening right now. The further we depart from communal permanence, the greater the risk of tyranny, feudalism, and revolution. Any error or disturbance can then bring disaster, as can a drought year in a desert, grain crop, or distant political decisions on tariffs. Let me read that again. Any error or disturbance can then bring disaster, as can a drought in a desert grain crop or a distant political decision on tariffs. Think global, act local is basically what we're getting at here. He's getting at here. The real risk is that the needs of those people working on the ground, the inhabitants, are overthrown by the needs or greeds of commerce and centralized power. That the forest is cut for warships or newspaper, and we are reduced to serfs in a barren landscape. This has been the fate of peasant Europe, Ireland, and much of the Third World. The characteristic that typifies all permanent agricultures is that the needs of the system for energy are provided by that system. Modern crop agriculture is totally dependent on external energies: pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, fertilizers. Hence, the oil problem and its associated pollution. There's an illustration here. I'm just going to talk about it. Figure 1.1 is a very simple but sufficient illustration of the case I am making. Selected forests not only yield more than annual crops, but provide a diverse nutrient and fuel resource for such crops. Without permanent agriculture, there is no possibility of a stable social order. Thus, the move from productive permanent systems, where the land is held in common, to annual commercial agricultures, where land is regarded as a commodity, involves a departure from a low to a high energy society. The use of land in an exploitive way and a demand for external energy resources, mainly provided by the Third World. People think I am slightly crazy when I tell them to go home and garden. or not to involve the go home and garden, or not to involve themselves in broad scale mechanized agriculture. But a little thought and reading will convince them that this is, in fact, the solution to many world problems. What is now possible is a totally new synthesis of plant and animal systems using a post industrial or even computerized approach to system design, applying the principles of whole system energy flows as devised by Odum in 1971, ODUM, and the principles of ecology as enunciated by Watt and others. It is, in the vernacular, a whole new ballgame to devise permaculture systems for local, regional, and personal needs. Had we taught this approach from the beginning, we would all be in a stable and functional landscape right now. But our grandparents failed us and, perhaps for lack of time or information, set up the present and continuing misdesigned households, towns, and cities. The concept of free energy put the file nail in the coffin of common sense community and enabled materialistic societies to rob distant people, oblivious to the inevitable accounting to come. We're almost there, folks. We got 1.3 to read. I want to just really quickly kind of talk about the photo that I was reading about here, figure 1.1. He's got an illustration here showing, it's a photo of a monoculture. And he shows over an 8-year period how you can transition that monoculture into a more sustainable permaculture design. By year 3, you're going to be cross-sectioning trees into your monoculture. By year 8, you will have developed a sustainable food forest far away from your home. You will have retrofitted your existing home to be more eco-friendly. I'm going to read the caption here on the photo. I've attempted to cost contemporary agriculture against a changeover to permaculture over a period of 3 to 8 years, the transition period. Basic changes involve replacing animal forage grains with tree crops, taking out the corn and putting in local trees that produce food, increasing forest cover, getting those nut trees in there, those canopy trees, tall canopy trees, low to no tillage on remaining crop lands, cover cropping, no tilling the soil, we're chopping and dropping, retrofitting the house for energy conservation, and producing some, if not all, fuel on the farm. And ultimately, what you see in the next bar chart that he's got set up is in the beginning, you've got a lot of yield of corn. And over the years of you changing your farm over, you're going to start losing that yield of corn, but you're going to start gaining yield elsewhere to where the whole system kind of levels out. And what you got is less corn, but you've got now more nuts, you've got more fruit trees, you've also now got more bird life, and animal life, amphibian life, you got more insect life living on there, you got more soil fertility. So you start with one and you're losing that, but in return, you're going to be gaining a lot of other good things by transitioning your monoculture into a permaculture, permanent agriculture design. Last section here, garden fans, 1.3. Let's get through it. Permaculture in landscape and society. Once again, I got a video coming out about my permaculture front yard landscape design. We'll talk about it then. As the basis of permaculture is beneficial design, it can be added to all other ethical training and skills and has the potential of taking a place in all human endeavors. In the broad landscape, however, permaculture concentrates on already settled areas and agricultural lands. Almost all of these need drastic rehabilitation and rethinking. We got to fix the monocultures. One certain result of using our skills to integrate food supply and settlement, to catch water from our roof areas, and to place nearby a zone of fuel forest which receives wastes and supplies energy, will be free to most of the area of the globe for the rehabilitation of natural systems. These need never be looked upon as of use to people, except in the very broad sense of global health. The real difference between a cultivated, designed ecosystem and a natural system is that the great majority of species and biomass in the cultivated ecology is intended for the use of humans or their livestock. We are only a small part of the total primeval or natural species assembly, and only a small part of its yields are directly available to us. But in our own gardens, almost every plant is selected to provide or support some direct yield for people. Household design relates principally to the needs of people. It is thus human-centered, anthropocentric. This is a valid aim for settlement design, but we also need a nature-centered ethic for wilderness conservation. We cannot, however, do much for nature if we do not govern our greed. And if we do not supply our needs from our existing settlements, if we can achieve this aim, we can withdraw from much of the agricultural landscape and allow natural systems to flourish. Recycling of nutrients and energy in nature is a function of many species. In our gardens, it is our own responsibility to return wastes, via compost or mulch, to the soil and plants. We actively create soil in our gardens, whereas in nature, many other species carry out that function. Around our homes, we can catch water for garden use, but we rely on natural forested landscapes to provide the condenser leaves and clouds, to keep rivers running with clean water, to maintain the global atmosphere, and to lock up our gaseous pollutants. We need forests to take up all the CO2 ultimately. I know that everybody would have you believe we have a carbon problem. The real problem is that we have a tree deficit. That is how permaculture sees it. We need large forests like the Amazon to be our carbon scrubbers for the earth. Thus, even the anthropocentric people would be well advised to pay close attention to and to assist in the conservation of existing forests and the rehabilitation of degraded lands. Our own survival demands that we preserve all existing species and allow them a place to live. We have abused the land and laid waste to systems we need never have disturbed had we attended to our home gardens and settlements. If we need to state a set of ethics on natural systems, let it be thus. 1. Implacable and uncompromising opposition to further disturbance of any remaining natural forests, where most species are still in balance. Vigorous rehabilitation of degraded and damaged natural systems to stable states. Establishment of plant systems for our own use on the least amount of land we can use for our existence, and the establishment of plant and animal refuges for rare or threatened species. Permaculture as a design system deals primarily with the third statement above. Establishment of plant systems for our own use on the least amount of land we can use for our existence. But all people who act responsibly, in fact, subscribe to the first and second statements as well. That said, I believe we should all use the species we need or can find to use in our own settlement designs, providing that they are not locally rampant or invasive. How can we create homes for the local birds and bees and all of the fun little things that live in your zone, wherever you are? Whether we approve of it or not, the world about us continually changes. Some would want to keep everything the same, but history, paleontology, and common sense tells us that all has changed, is changing, will change. In a world where we are losing forests, species, and whole ecosystems, there are 3 concurrent and parallel responses to the environment. Care for surviving natural assemblies to leave the wilderness to heal itself. Number 2, rehabilitate degraded or eroded land using complex pioneer species and long-term plant assemblies, trees, shrubs, ground covers. And 3, create our own complex living environment with as many species as we can save or have need for, from wherever on Earth they come. We are fast approaching the point where we need refuges for all global life forms, as well as regional, national, or state parks for indigenous forms of plants and animals. While we see our local flora and fauna as native, we may also logically see all life as native to Earth. While we try to preserve systems that are still local and diverse, We should also build new or recombinant ecologies from global resources, especially in order to stabilize degraded lands. In your own garden, there are likely to be plants, animals, and soil organisms from every major landmass and many islands. Jet travel has merely accelerated a process already well established by continental drift, bird migration, wind transport, and the rafting of debris by water. Everything will, in time, either become extinct, spread more widely, or evolve to new forms. Each of these processes is happening at once, but the rate of extinction and exchange is accelerating. Rather than new species, adapted hybrids are arising, for example, as palms, seagrasses, and snails, and microorganisms from many continents meet, mix, and produce new accommodations to their new environment. The very chemistry of the air, soil, and water is in flux. Metals, chemicals, isotopes, gases, and plastics are loose on Earth that have never been present before, or never present in such form and quantity before we made it so. This is a really big hit at the plastics industries right here in particular. And here again, this was even before we had microplastics in every corner of the Earth. He was already talking about this. Bill goes on to say, "It is my belief that we have two responsibilities to pursue. Primarily, is to get our house and garden, our place of living in order so that it supports us, be self-sufficient. Secondarily, it is to limit our population on Earth or we ourselves become the final plague." That's a tough one for a lot of people to stomach or to hear. Certainly, you think about the globalists of the planet that want to depopulate the Earth as quick as possible. When you hear something like that, I don't think that Bill is a globalist per se. I just certainly think he wants to take care of the Earth. And if we're going to have people on that Earth, they need to be smart and being part of the solution and not part of the problem. Both these duties are intimately connected, as stable regions create stable populations. If we do not get our cities, homes, and gardens in order so that they feed and shelter us, we must lay waste to all their natural systems. Thus, truly responsible conservationists have gardens which support their food needs and are working to reduce their own energy needs to a modest consumption, or to that which can be supplied by local wind, water, forest, or solar power resources. We're almost there, folks. We can work on providing biomass for our essential energy needs on a household and regional scale. It is hypocrisy to pretend to save forests, yet to buy daily newspapers and packaged food, to preserve native plants, yet rely on agrochemical production for food, and to adopt a diet which calls for broad-scale food production. Philosopher gardeners or farmer poets are distinguished by their sense of wonder and real feeling for the environment. When religions cease to obliterate trees in order to build temples or human artifacts, and instead generalize love and respect to all living systems as a witness to the potential of creation, they too will join the many of us now deeply appreciating the complexity and self-sustaining properties of natural systems, from whole universes to simple molecules. Gardener, science, philosopher, poet, and adherent of religions all can conspire in admiration of and reverence for this earth. We create our own life conditions now and for the future. In permaculture, this means that all of us have some part in identifying, supporting, recommending, investing in, or creating wilderness habitats and species refuges. The practical way to proceed outside the home garden is to form or subscribe to institutes or organizations whose aims under their legal charter are to carry out conservation activities. While the costs are low, in sum total, the effects are profound. Even the smallest garden can reserve off a few square meters of insect, lizard, frog, or butterfly habitat, while larger gardens and farms can fence off forest and wetland areas of critical value to local species. Such areas should be only for the conservation of local species. Permaculture as a design system contains nothing new. It arranges what was always there in a different way so that it works to conserve energy or to generate more energy than it consumes. What is novel and often overlooked is that any system of total common sense design for human communities is revolutionary. This is something I always say too in every tour I do. This is not new technology. Think rice paddies, and cisterns in the desert. This is just the same information redesigned, reorganized in a different way to make us think about it differently. And for most people, this is going to be revolutionary, but for the expert, it makes sense. It's intuitive. Design is the key word of this book, Permaculture Design Manual. Design in landscape, social and conceptual systems, and design in space and time. I've attempted a treatment on the difficult subject of patterning and have tried to order some complex subjects so as to make them accessible. The text is positivistic, without either the pretended innocence or the belief that everything will turn out right. Only if we make it so will this happen. As will be clear in other chapters of the book, the end result of the adoption of permaculture strategies in any country or region will be to drastically reduce the area of agricultural environment needed by the households and the settlements of people, and to realize much of the landscape for the sole use of wildlife and for reoccupation by endemic flora. Respect for all life forms is a basic and, in fact, essential ethic for all people. And that, my friends, is chapter 1 through 1.3. This took a little bit longer than I would have liked it to take. Like I said, next week we're going to be reading through chapter 2, and we'll probably read through subsection 1, 2, 3, or 3 through 4, time permitting. I'm going to try to, once again, garden fans, keep these videos to around 30 minutes. If you stuck around the whole time or watching at a later date, I really appreciate you sticking around this long. If you got any questions about permaculture or any of the content here in general, please just ask, leave a comment. We appreciate y'all coming. We thank you for your support. We'll see you next time. God bless.